Okay, wow, those lights are bright. Well, thanks everybody for joining. You guys will actually walk away here with something that the other folks that chose to stay at lunch aren't going to get. So today, our topic is the state of cybersecurity within the financial services space. So this is kind of a trick question, to be honest, because, well, this is just a quick bio about myself. Like I said, or like you said, I'm a cybersecurity expert. I've been doing this for a long time. But back to the topic at hand. So really it's a misleading question because depending upon where you are and your viewpoint in financial services, the answer to that question is vastly different. You know, if you're thinking of like broker-dealers and big institutional banks and, you know, other big institutions, you're probably on the side that's the grass is greener. You probably have a lot of regulation. You probably have a program to some extent. Maybe the maturity isn't all the way there. But for everybody else, it's vastly lacking. You know, think of mortgage brokers or just CPA firms, your IRAs, your REITs, plan sponsors. Everybody's got a different regulatory framework that they have to adhere to, which are the ones that are in red. And you may not even actually ever even get audited by one of these companies. So if you're a small CPA or a small RIA shop and you have to adhere to different things, the likelihood that they're actually going to come down in front of you is not that great. So what I see in going out and talking to different companies and different clients of mine is, you know, a lot of them have been rolling the dice because there really isn't anybody coming out to look at them like a big institutional bank, you know, like the OCC is going out to banks. In the broker-dealer space, you have FINRA and the SEC coming out and doing on-site reviews and then sometimes going down to the advisor. But from the RIA space, and even in the insurance space, that's not present. Now, New York DFS is out there. New York DFS, you have to attest every year if you're licensed in the state of New York. You either have to file an exemption or certify your compliance every year. Well, the insurance industry is actually going that route as well. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with MDL 668, which is the Insurance Data Security Model Law, where it pretty much is a foundation, a starting point for all the insurance commissioners across all the states to say, hey, this is what we're going to do. And then they can add in whatever additional things that they want on top of that. So for instance, in Louisiana, the Department of the DOL, which is the Department of the Insurance, they have a filing system that's very similar to New York DFS, but you don't do it online. They actually want you to actually file a piece of paper and email it back to them. So if you're in the insurance space and the RIA space, you're definitely going to see more things coming that you haven't really had the exposure to in past. And then obviously there's all kind of different breaches. So, you know, things are just going to, there's more regulation coming than less. So whatever vertical you're in within financial services and insurance, whether it's listed on the screen or not, just know that cybersecurity, whether it be regulation or oversight, is definitely headed your way. So here, this is a chart from the World Economic Forum. They produce this every year. This is from 2020. I know it's a little blurry on the screen, but the circle is actually cybersecurity. So, you know, your business is most likely to be hit with a cybersecurity attack than almost any other risks that are out there. And that's true because you see every day that there's some new company that's in the news for either failing to do something or falling victim to something. Now, this article was actually just released. It's on Inc. And this was from a former FBI agent. He was actually one of the assistant directors. And I know from looking at the attendee list, there was a lot of founders, a lot of directors, managing directors, CEOs. I thought it was very good to put this in here because from my standpoint, everything starts at the top. Your cyber program in your company starts at the top. And you're not only a CEO, or let me rephrase that. You used to be a CEO. You're no longer a CEO. You're now a risk officer. And your job is managing cyber risk because, you know, as you go forward in time, you're going to be liable for your organization's cyber, both criminally and civilly in some aspects of it. So what I want to cover today is really just an overview of process, because like I said, when I go into organizations and I typically start at the top and look at the executive level and what governance you have in place, this is a common theme that's always missing. And I just want you guys to actually see what the process is. I'm actually going to show you a tool that can help and aid you. It'll be free. All you have to do is let me know if you want it, and I'll give it to you for free. It's just an Excel document. Because in cybersecurity, it's not just technology. It's people, process, and technology. And most cyber incidents aren't a result of technology. It's a result of people, whether the people configured it wrong or the people did something. So cyber is not an IT problem, it's a business problem. That's what I want you guys to take away today. But anyway, here's a proven process. Now I know it might be a little bit hard to see here on the screen, but you have to have an escalation and a de-escalation path. And what I mean by that is risks in your organization have to be escalated and addressed or tracked. That's what any type of cybersecurity program is going to do. It's all about risk management. And you might have different avenues to where that risk is actually being elevated from and to. If you're a smaller company, you're probably going to do the orange and blue in one function. It might just be one person doing that. In a bigger company, it might be broken down where any risk that you come across is going to be escalated to maybe an information security steering committee, which is a grouping of people, so not one person owns it. And then they might escalate risks that they aren't able to address to a risk oversight committee, which is the stuff in blue. But at any point, all those risks feed into a funnel. And what I see in business today is they feed into separate funnels. And we'll get to that a little here later, but the two different funnels are business initiatives and risks. And typically they're done in a siloed fashion, sometimes by the same individuals, but they don't really look at them in tandem with one another because they actually are directly tied to one another. But let me just take you through what I'm talking about, this process of escalation and de-escalation. You need to be able to get to your employees and actually help them understand risk and actually put it into their daily business, what they do on a daily, from a daily basis. So if you're working in going out marketing and getting on new advisors, let's say you're in a broker-dealer and you need to bring in new advisors. Well, how many new advisors is low and how many is high? Is that if I bring in, or how many from a retention standpoint, how many do I lose? Is losing 10 advisors, is that like a 1 out of a 1 to 5 scale, or is that a 2 or a 3 or a 4? Or if I lose 50 advisors, where does that fall? So you have to actually get out into the business and understand the business to be able to actually have and formulate risk so your employees understand it so they can actually make better business decisions. But anyway, what's on the screen here is, for smaller companies, they're probably just going to focus on the things that are in red. They're just going to look at it from a very high standpoint. What category is this? Insignificant, major, moderate? What type of percentages? Is this 0 to 5% or whatnot? Now, if you want to expand beyond that as your company grows and matures, by all means do that and break it down into different departments. So, from a recruiting standpoint, okay, well, how many new recruits and where do they fall in that space from a risk standpoint, from probability and impact? And then ultimately, you as a business need to determine what your risk tolerance and risk appetite is. And then this is something that I also see that's never really defined in an organization. And you clearly see it in a lot of the breaches because they're taking on risks that they probably really shouldn't have never even taken. But that's largely because they don't have a defined appetite to know what risks to take. So once you do know that, and in this example, it's between the orange and yellow, so anything that's orange and red is exceeding your tolerance, anything below that is within your tolerance. And you need to have a path of what are we going to do? If I bring a risk forward and I bring it to a committee and that committee, let's say they can't solve it, well, we need to track it. You can't not do anything because not doing something is risk acceptance. Ignorance isn't a risk mitigation option. You can avoid it, accept it, transfer it, mitigate it. They're the only 4 options. So once you know about something, you can either track it or not, but at that point, you're accepting either way. And it'll definitely come out whenever an incident does happen and somebody comes in post-incident to actually figure it out. It'll just be more damaging to your business if it isn't tracked and monitored. So in that escalation path, you definitely want to have remediation tied to it. So if we define, in the example on the screen here, anything that's in orange, that exceeds our tolerance. Well, what if it's a 15 if it's a 15, okay, well maybe we say the ones that fall into a 15, we need to remediate within, 18 months. There has to be some type of criteria. And let's say a 16 and a 20, we have to address those in 10 months. And anything in the 25 or the red area, we have to address within 3 months. So there has to be some definition of how fast are we going to solve risks or address risks or accept them or whatever the case might be. But this all goes back to that first slide that I had where you're looking at it in different silos in most cases. What I see in businesses where there's initiatives that the business says, you know what, we're going to go do these 5 things this year. And they say, yep, go do them, here's the funding. And then they're on the risks side of the house is they have these risks and they're like, oh yeah, we have to do those, we need to remediate those too. The problem is the resources underneath are generally the same people. And it just adds complexity, and most times those things don't get done. The initiatives happen and the risk just sits on a register and never gets addressed. This is just an example. This is actually a screenshot of the actual physical tool. It's just, like I said, it's just an Excel spreadsheet. It's got a lot of automation in there. By all means, if you want to use this for your business, if you don't have something like this today that's actually tracking your risk to your business, highly recommend it because almost every framework out there, regulatory-wise, requires you to have a risk assessment, and part of the risk assessment is tracking the risk to your company. And this is a cheap and easy way to do it versus going out and spending thousands of dollars on a tool that actually help you do it. So on the screen here, there's 3 separate risks because the first thing that I always generally see in organizations is their patching isn't up to date or it's ineffective. They don't know what systems have got security patches or not. So that would be the first risk. Very easy to address and mitigate and correct. The second one is a firewall. There's a lot of RIA offices and CPA offices that I walk into that the organization is relying solely on the device that their internet service provider provided them, the cable modem. That is not a firewall and is not able to protect your business. So that's, again, everything you see here is going to be on the sheet that I give you if you want it. But you definitely need to address that space. I mean, if you're a US-based company, why do you allow everybody in the world to get to your office? Meaning your physical office where you're actually officing out of. Because they really don't need to. They only need to get to your public website, or maybe your client login if people are traveling. But to your physical office location, the only way you're going to solve that is through a firewall and doing GeoIP filtering and saying, you know what, every other country is not going to be able to come straight to my door and walk in, because from a hacking standpoint, it's always the path of least resistance. If I have to go through an additional way to get to your building versus this other person, there's just too many other people out there that don't have anything. They're going to choose that path over you. So just make it harder for them to actually come in. I mean, I don't know how many times, I'm a certified incident handler, I don't know how many times I've worked incident response issues where I get a call on a Saturday in the afternoon and it's somebody saying, hey, well, I'm at the office right now and these returns or this app from 5 years ago is printing out on the printer. I don't know why I didn't print that. Well, it's because the hacker is actually in your computer, hit the wrong button, thought they were printing locally to their building, and they printed to your building. So it's very easily mitigated by just putting in some controls to prevent this stuff from happening. But that ultimately ended up resulting in now he having to notify his entire book of business all his clients that said, hey, your information may have been potentially compromised. Now, you as a client, if you get that letter, and let's just say that's your broker, how likely are you going to stay with that broker to manage your money? Highly unlikely. They're just going to move to a different broker. The next one on here is backups. This is definitely something from a ransomware. I'm sure everybody in here has heard of ransomware. The best way to prevent ransomware is to take a backup, a full backup, because then you can get your data back. Now, I know there's some ransomwares out there that actually try to, if you don't pay them, they'll expose it and things like that, but those generally aren't likely the case. It's more likely the fact that they're just trying to make some money, and if they encrypt all your data and you have no other way to get that data back, they're making money. But there's a very easy way to mitigate against that, and it's just taking a full backup of your environment. Okay, well, if it takes a day to restore all your assets, so be it. You didn't have to pay that person out, and you didn't lose any data. So just make sure you have a backup. It's very easy to do. The next three are cyber insurance. I don't know how many, this doesn't even go from the small side of the house. There's some medium, mid-cap, and larger companies that don't have cyber insurance, which is crazy to me. But if you don't have cyber insurance, I highly, highly encourage you to get it. It's very, very cheap. It is not expensive. If you need recommendations of where to go, I can definitely give you those recommendations of who to reach out to from that standpoint. But there's just so many benefits that you're going to get from cyber insurance if something bad does happen. I can't stress that enough. Is definitely make sure you get cyber insurance. Vendor management. I'm sure everybody here has vendors, whether they're upstream or downstream, to you as an organization that you rely on or they rely on you. And make sure you do the due diligence of those vendors and continually monitor those vendors for, what's their security posture? What controls do they have in place? Are they putting your information at risk? If you go and, let's say you go and say, hey, I want this new CRM tool. Oh yeah, we're going to use this new CRM tool. And after you're already using it for 5 months, you learn that they don't encrypt any of the data that's in it. That's not good. Because now you have to make a conscious decision, do we stay in it? You probably don't have any leverage from your contract standpoint if it's not in the contract for them to put it in. And now you're actually looking at having to migrate out of that to a company that does, because ultimately that's going to be a risk that would be on your risk register that you'd have to track, because in most cases all frameworks are going to require you to encrypt their information, and you theoretically aren't doing that. So that would be another one, is make sure you have some type of a process in place to manage and monitor your vendors, whether it's during onboarding or throughout the life cycle. Definitely as you bring somebody on, you want to make sure that they have the appropriate controls to help protect your business, but also every year you should follow back up and just make sure there's no material changes to that contract or that company's security posture. Also make sure that in the contracts you have written in there that those companies are supposed to notify you in the event that they're breached. Because that's something that I typically see not in contracts, and they don't have to notify you, when in theory, your business information was compromised. And then the last one is security monitoring. Now, this is kind of hard. Not all companies are going to do this. This is basically 24/7 monitoring of your organization. This is like sticking a security guard inside your physical office location to make sure nobody busts in the front door. Same thing is from a logical standpoint. There's definitely solutions out there that can help you, that'll monitor your company's network while you're at home, while you're on vacation at 2 o'clock in the morning to know if something bad happened. Because my guess is without that, the likelihood that any of you are actually employing a full-time cyber expert to look at everything to determine if and when an incident happened is, I can't imagine. There'd probably only be maybe a few hands that would be raised if I actually asked you if you guys did have somebody that did that. So that would be another thing. So those are just 6 risk items that will be tracked on a risk register that you need to do some type of action for. What are you going to do in those 6 areas that I just talked about? Now there's plenty more. I mean, there's tons more. Multi-factor authentication would be one of them. Like, I can't stress that enough, is to perform multi-factor authentication on your email and other things. I'm actually going to fly through here because I know we're pushing up on time. I just want to highlight this slide. Cybersecurity is people, process, and technology. It starts at the top. Your culture is going to dictate how your company is from a cyber standpoint. Because if you have different rules for different people, your company is going to fail from a cyber perspective. If executives have a different set of standards than your normal employees, it will fail. Just keep that in mind. You definitely want to have whoever is running your cybersecurity program a peer to whoever is your CIO equivalent. It should definitely have input and inclusion into senior leadership, whether it's executive leadership or senior leadership. This is around debt, so this is probably more for the bigger companies. I'm just going to load all this real quick. Typically, I'll do a 5-year roadmap for somebody, and then year 2, they're like, we got to stay flat. So, the example on the right here is they decided to stay flat, but they initially budgeted in first year $3 million. Well, $2 million of it wasn't spent, and then the next year 1.2 wasn't spent, so now you have $3.2 million in cyber debt that was supposed to be for remediation and addressing risk. And then in year 3, you pick back up, but you know what? We want this new business initiative, we want email migration, we'll throw that in there. And what I most times see is that first 3.2 that you accumulated in cyber debt never gets put back in. It's just like, we'll forego that, and we'll just do this rest of this stuff. When in reality, you need to disperse that over the remaining years, because at that 5-year point, you need to get back on track. And if you don't reincorporate that back in over the remaining years, you'll never get back on track. It's more applicable in your bigger organizations, not so much in your smaller firms. This is also something more for the mid-size and larger firms. This is called tracer data. And what I mean by this is, I used to be in the Air Force, so we have tracer rounds. And tracer round tells you where a round is going downrange. And basically this is whatever your client master is, put some dummy data in it that you're always going to monitor. That way, if you're giving information to a vendor and that information ever comes up in a data dump on the dark web, one, you can determine, let's say you have 15 vendors. Well, in incident response, looking at all 15 vendors is a large effort. But if you were able to determine, it came from vendor C, then you could put all your effort into vendor C. Now, the problem is, if you see data points from vendor C, vendor B, and vendor A, or whatever the case might be, multiple data points, you're the source of the breach, not the vendor. So just keep that in mind. This is just something I like to do in organizations, is help them put that tracer data in. But here's my top 5 recommendations for you when you walk away today. Obtain an external risk assessment by a cyber expert if you don't have one internally. Purchase cyber insurance. Enable multi-factor, 2-factor authentication on VPN, remote access, as well as email. Monitor your environment, and limit email history. What I mean by limit email history is email is the most attacked vector. And if you're a company and you've been in existence for, 10 years, and you have 10 years worth of email in there, and you never purged out any email, well, if your email gets compromised and it gets popped, and there's any type of ability where there's a sync that's in play, meaning I could potentially sync your mailbox as a hacker, then everything in your mail is now in scope from a privacy notification standpoint. So you might not even have customers anymore from 10 years ago, but guess what? You're going to notify 10 years worth of people, and you're going to pay a significant amount of money to have somebody go through your email, extract all the information, do a manual review of the information, determine what points are in scope. Like, think of from the insurance standpoint. You not only have personal information, but you probably also have healthcare information. It's a big undertaking, and your cyber insurance, that money that you have that's set aside, in most cases you either have $1 million or a $2 million aggregate, that money is gone. Like, you're already eating into your own profit now. So definitely, I couldn't encourage you more to limit the email history. Like, only allow it to go back a year, but then put the rest of it in an archive that you could go to a website and actually log into and look at historical data, versus it actually sitting in your mailbox, always there and always available. That's what I mean about limit email history. This is the single most important thing. Like, this is what I see most frequently in breaches, is when it's during email, they're going back years, like years, and having to notify everybody, when in reality they didn't have to. They could have just chose to limit it to a year, and instead of notifying 3 million customers, they could have notified 500. Like, it's crazy. These are just services that we offer at HC Cyber. We're mainly a consulting firm. I help you guys build out programs for your companies to get you on track. I can help you remediate the whole people, process, and technology stack. But here's my email address. So if you do want that document to track risk in your organization, just email me. I'll send it to you. It's free. You just have to start using it. I mean, you're going to have to use it. I'm not going to do it for you. So, unless you pay me. So, but that's all I have. Any questions or anything today? I think I have one over here. Sorry, I'm blinded by the light.
Thank you, Paul. I was listening to